it's time to go on a time travel journey. My mission was clear. I had 3 famous snack brands to redesign so they could fit into different time periods. But would my designs end up being terrible or true time travel tributes? And we're going to start with Pepsi here, and we're going back to the 1960s. Groovy. The cliche and the generic approach for rebranding Pepsi for the 1960s would be lots of bright, vibrant, LSD-induced colours. But I decided to go against this. I wanted to keep the design in congruence with the colour scheme that Pepsi has adopted over the years, that being red, white and blue. But how to do that in respect to the 1960s kind of style? Firstly, I experimented with wavy kind of groovy style lines and shapes, but I did keep close to the branding of Pepsi, that being red and blue. This would help later. So, I thought it would be a good idea to place the Beatles at the bottom of the can with red undertones. I soon realised that this wasn't working and I scrapped the idea altogether. I really did like the concept of Beatles in a kind of cartoon style on the can, but as a concept, I had to accept it had to go. I realised I wanted to have the 1960s theme, but with a clean brand and packaging solution. So, going back to the basics, I started with the blue background. And then I started to work on some neat wavy red lines. However, standing back and taking a look at it, something hit me. The 1960s was all about peace, free love, and all that good stuff. So from a shape psychology point of view, I decided to make these lines horizontal as opposed to vertical. And this is because, according to shape psychology, this is more peaceful and more calming. From here, I could have just slapped on the Pepsi logo like this, but that would be a big mistake and an injustice to the 60s. So I spent some time working on some custom hand lettering that would actually better represent the 60s kind of vibe. And this is what I finally came up with. Now I feel that this design keeps in line with the Pepsi brand. It's clean and yet it's still reminiscent of the 60s. I added a large blue circle behind the logo, and this helps to actually cut up the red lines around the logo itself. It's more of just 60s typography than a logo, but yeah, pretty pleased with this one. Next up was Twix. For the Twix, we aren't stepping back to the 1980s, rather the 1880s. That is the later stages of the Victorian era. I don't really have a costume for this one. The Twix packaging and brand is very modern and it uses red, gold and also white as the main colour scheme for their identity. Let's also not forget how tasty these things actually are. Who doesn't love a Twix? For this one, forgive the slightly different size packaging. The end result should come together really well. Now, I started off with a main colour scheme of red, but I did darken and age it a tiny bit to fall in line with the Victorian period. The Victorians were really into their decorative motifs and styles, and so I started with a classical border of gold, and I think this works really well against the red. And from there, I spent a while working with lines and motifs to build up the main design for the packaging, and that happened to be this right here. But of course, we then need some typography for the Twix, and alongside that, I added the left and right motif on each side. But this was far from done. I mean, how could I design this and not showcase the star of the show, that being the Twix? For that, I first applied some foil to give some kind of realism to the packaging being opened up. And then of course the big shaboozle, it is the Twix chocolate itself. After some shadows, some dodge and burning and other effects, we now have a Twix from the 1800s. Yummy. The third time travel design today is for Lays, or as they're called in this country, Walkers. For this, we're going to go back to the 1980s. The colour scheme I wanted to run with for this should be obvious, right? It's bright pinks, purples, blues, maybe even cyans and greens. But there was somebody I wanted to include in my design, the man of the time himself, David Bowie. Sure, also of course the 70s, but let's keep designing. I really wanted to catch the synth pop style, and so I went really hard with my colour scheme right here and included a grid in the background with transparency effects. This little box at the bottom here, this is where our main man was going to go, along with some key information that Lays do actually put on their packaging, in 80s style of course. I also then desaturated and altered the hue of the logo so it fell more in line with the design. And once on the packaging, I liked how the top triangle shape was directing the viewer's eye down to the logo and the rest of the design. That wasn't totally by mistake, of course. What else could we go with for this flavor other than retro? And of course, done in retro typography. And if you've noticed, Lay's do tend to have some imagery of real chips on the packaging, so I decided to experiment with this on my design. And actually, this mock-up has weird lighting, so I took things to a different one, as you can see here. I am aware the chips are not ridged like seen on the packaging. False advertising was really cool back in the 80s, come on. But which of these designs do you feel like was the truest to the time period? Let me know with a comment down below. But if you want to learn something hugely valuable to you as a graphic designer, just click the video on screen. And until next time guys, design your future today. Peace.